Hi, I'm Tim Harkness. I'm from Bankmed Health Cells. Bankmed Health Cells is Bankmed's wellness program. Last year we were awarded the best wellness program in South Africa offered by a medical scheme. We're quite proud of that. Now, you might be wondering, what is an expert in corporate wellness doing here on a rocky shore? Well, even though it might not look like it, there are a lot of similarities between the rocky shore and the banking environment. Both of them are demanding pressurized environments. I'll give you an example. If I was to stay here for another 3 or so hours, I'd be drowned. The water levels will rise, and soon this entire area will be submerged, subjected to the pounding wave action, cold, and obviously the respiratory demands of an underwater environment. If I was to move a little bit higher up the shore and stay there in 36 hours or so, if I had no external assistance, I'd probably be dead from exposure. That's my ability to survive in this environment, but obviously I'm surrounded by thousands and thousands of animals, many different species, and all of them go through these changes 4 times a day, every day, and they seem to be doing very nicely. Banking environment, pressured, demanding as well, and bankers need to be able to adapt, innovate in order to survive in that environment. You may be asking yourself, well, if it's such a harsh environment, why does anything live here at all? There are 2 good reasons. The one reason is that it's a rocky substrate. It means that the animals have got something firm to fasten themselves on. And in fact, the rockiness means that this is one of the most prolific marine environments that you get. Just contrast it just over there to the sandy shore. Far fewer animals live there. And the second very good reason is this wave action, this constant wave action. Every single time a wave comes in, brings in particles of food with it, and these animals are designed to exploit the advantage of having a constant food source. Exactly the same in the bank. For sure it's pressurized, for sure it's demanding, but there are tremendous advantages of working in a bank as well, and bankers need to be able to innovate in order to adapt themselves to exploiting those advantages also. Let's go to a bank and have a look at some of the peculiarities, some of the demands, some of the advantages of that environment.
There are a lot of work pressures on bankers that weren't there before.
I think the banking environment changes a lot.
Continuously doing more with less.
The risk factors, which are far greater maybe in the banking sector than some of the other sectors out there.
The first one would be communication.
Managing your time efficiently.
It's a massive change. You got to adjust.
Time is always a problem.
The change is too rapid.
There's a lot happening.
We never get enough time to settle.
The lack of physical activity and a balanced lifestyle is a risk factor that actually affects bankers.
Living on the edge the whole time.
We just can't keep up.
Change is not easy.
Challenge firstly is to maintain your sanity.
One of the other more silent effects in terms of bankers is in actual fact stress.
The modern corporate world that we live in is very complex.
There are opportunities, and it depends on the individual and the area in which you are in.
There's a huge challenge in terms of being right there on the spot and being accurate as possible.
One of the advantages would be the fact that you're working for a big organization, and there's obviously growth in that particular organization.
So what we're seeing is that both rocky shore invertebrates and bankers need to be able to adapt themselves to their environments. And the product of a challenging but advantageous environment is that the inhabitants of that environment become extremely innovative in the solutions they achieve to exploit the advantages and survive the difficulties of that environment. This is a lower shore limpet, and I shouldn't even really be trying, but I'm completely unable to dislodge this thing from its position on the rock. There are a couple of reasons for that. The one is its shape. It's got a nice, smooth, streamlined shape, obviously adapted for resisting wave action. It means that I can't get a good grip to pull it. But in addition to that, it's got a strong foot, and it secretes a mucus layer between its foot and the rock that adheres to the rock. In fact, a large limpet can resist a force of up to 100 kilograms, meaning that it's more than able to cope with this wave action and with my tugging as well. The lower shore limpets tend to be quite flat, so they're streamlined, they can resist the wave action. But that flatness means that they're very exposed to the sun. They've got a high surface area for their volume. Here's a nice example of a higher shore limpet, and you can see that it's much more conically shaped. Obviously, because it's higher up, there's not as much wave action, so it doesn't have to be as streamlined. But also, because it's higher up, it's a lot hotter up here, there's a lot more sun. It needs to be able to resist heat and desiccation better. And its much more sharply conical shape means that it has a higher volume per surface area, and it also means that it radiates heat much better. I'm going to find another example. This is my favorite example of limpets adapting themselves to survive in an extremely dry environment. They're right up here on the high up on the shore. One innovation that I would love to come up with is sunscreen that doesn't run into your eyes when you get wet. This stuff's killing me. But let's get to these limpets. This is a small depression in the rock that I found when I was here 2 weeks ago. And there's a whole limpet colony living here. Now, these are the really hardcore guys of the limpets. They're able to survive right up here on the shore where they're subjected to sunlight almost all of the daylight hours, and very rarely will they be completely submerged in water. So what they've done, they've found this depression, and there's a little bit of water here all the time, and that's a behavioral innovation. They shelter themselves in the water. But there are a couple of other innovations as well. The other, and you will see from footage that we took 2 weeks ago, all of these limpets are in exactly the same place in the rock. Look at this one over here. They return to exactly the same place all the time. And what happens is that they actually wear away at the rock, and they achieve a perfect fit between their shell and the rock. And that means that water loss is minimized because of that very, very tight fit. And the final innovation is that some of them have ridges on them. The shell is ridged. And that means that they can radiate heat that much better and resist the temperature that we're getting from this direct sunlight. And all of that enables what is normally a low shore species to take advantage of the constant algal growth that springs up when these rocks are wet, and survive really quite high up on the shore. It's something limpets aren't normally able to do. The winkle is interesting because it faces exactly the same environmental challenges as the limpet, but it's got quite a different solution. This one has got a very different shape and a very small mouth, which means that it's much better adapted to resisting water loss. You can see it's not as streamlined, so it can't resist wave action as well, which is why they tend to live higher up on the shore. They can resist water loss so well, you can actually put one in a matchbox and take it home for a couple of weeks. You get it back none the worse for wear. And it's got quite a ridged shell. And again, exactly like the limpets, it means that it can radiate that heat and avoid heat loss better. Another trick that it's got, as the rock starts to get hot, it will actually retract its foot inside its shell away from the heat of the rock. And a third trick that they've got, they'll actually climb on top of each other, sit on top of your buddy, let him take the heat. I'm just trying to think of a banking example of that form of relationship, but maybe I'd better not. There's this whole line of sea urchins, and sea urchins have a behavioral innovation in that they pick up shells and they actually hold the shells above themselves as a makeshift parasol, protect themselves from the sun.
Everything happens and then we react to it and try and fix the problem, and we've now totally changed the viewpoint where we have become proactive.
We are creatures of habit, and it's very difficult to get rid of your habits. But I've decided that I've got to look at things differently.
Now, another animal that views the world from a different perspective is the barnacle. You get a range of barnacles that again live in different areas along the shore. The lower shore barnacles live in more sheltered areas, and they tend to have more fragile legs that they will stick out and filter food from the water when the water's moving past them nice and slowly. If it gets too rough, they just pull their legs in. If it gets too still, they start to paddle. And these guys are the higher shore barnacles. They're going to get smacked around by the waves a bit. They tend to have much stronger legs that they can stick out and just let the food particles get caught in the hairs on their legs. A totally sessile animal, doesn't move at all. And if that lifestyle sounds appealing to you, no exercise, 24-hour-a-day food delivery service, you just got to be a little bit careful because you don't want to be headed down that evolutionary path. In the banking environment, bankers also aren't required to move around a lot. But we're going to be speaking to Vandra Mireille, who's a biokineticist, about whether bankers should really be moving steadily towards becoming sessile.
Well, the challenges in the banking environment is that people are fixed to their office environments, and people are seated for at least 75% of their day.
It's about finding creative ways to exercise.
People need to be more physically active.
The health risks with people working in the bank are, number one, the fact that they are probably less active than what they would be.
That is the biggest physical wellness challenge in the office environment.
We've been challenged with taking exercise to our people.
Every hour you need to at least get up for 6 minutes to relieve the stress and get up and get your blood circulation going.
But as an executive, it's important to give exercise because most of the work that I do simply sit, I'm sitting most of the time in meetings.
People think we only need to exercise, but we need to be physically active, and that you can do in your office.
And we came up with a Fitband home training program, and what it is it's an elastic band like this. We took this together with 2 handles, and you will simply just tie a knot on the one side, or 2 knots, and one on the other side. And remember, the focus here is to take exercise to the staff. Exercise anytime, anywhere. Now you've got an elastic that you can train with. You can do arm curls like that. You can do a shoulder press like that. Okay, you can do shoulder lateral movements like that. You can do frontal movements like that. You can do alternative training, one arm at a time. There's a wide variety. You can train the tricep there. In combination with cardiovascular exercise, it's now easy to train anytime, anywhere.
Our typical example of a crustacean is the crab, so well adapted for life here on the rocky shore. You get a whole lot of crabs here. You get the hermit crabs who actually inhabit the shells abandoned by other animals. That's an innovation. Another crab is called the boxer crab, and it's another example of a symbiotic relationship. And what the boxer crab does, it finds a small anemone and puts it onto its claw. And the effect of that is that its punching power is much greater because it has these stinging tentacles on the tips of its claw. That's how the boxer crab benefits. Whereas the anemone benefits because all the food particles that are generated as the boxer crab eats, it's able to just extract from the water, and it's got a plentiful supply of food. Hermit crabs, they've got these really tiny little claws. Even this one is quite a big hermit crab, but its claws are far too small to support an anemone. But some of them they'll put an anemone on their backs. Another example of predator resistance that I really like is the limpet. These limpets are completely covered in algae. They're really well camouflaged. I can see them, but their main predator, the whelk, won't be able to. The algae actually disguises the scent of the limpet as well. The whelk is a snail-like mollusk that will actually crawl right over the limpet and drill clean through its shell. And it's a bit of a messy process because it reaches into the limpet and just sucks it out from the inside. You may actually have seen those shells sometimes. You find them on the beach. They've got a very neat little hole in them. If we move back into the banking environment, you will find that there's predation pressure there also. In my experience with the banks, really 3 sources of predators. The one tends to be your very own co-workers, obviously clients, customers, another one, and then finally managers. And we're going to be moving into the bank to find out more about how bankers survive.